right. Well, hello, everyone, and thank you for joining today's webinar on Simplify Records Management with Robotic Process Automation. We appreciate you all being here. And the first thing I would like to do is take a second and introduce our speaker today. My name is Sean Ennis, and I am the Learning and Development Manager here at Gimbal, and I am joined by our key speaker today, the Director of Client Services, Shinder Tao. Before we get started, I would like to go through a few housekeeping items. We have a live Q&A after today's session, so please feel free to submit questions throughout the webinar, and at the end, we will answer as many questions as we can. If you have any technical difficulties, please send us a message and let us know, so we can help you solve any issues you might be having. First, I have a few slides here to tell you a little bit about Gimbal. Gimbal is a records management software company that was founded in 2002. We have a services team and global network of partners that have been delivering solutions with us for more than 17 years. Our primary technology partners are Microsoft and SAP. Our implementation partners include small specialty SIs with specific areas of expertise, as well as large global SIs and consultants like PwC and Lockheed Martin. And with over 500,000 licensed users and growing, we have a strong community of some of the best clients in the world. Now, before we get started, let's dive a little deeper into the problem that Gimbal software solves. The reason Gimbal exists is because so many enterprises struggle to manage the sheer volume of information and systems they have. For years, they have been adding business applications and information, but they haven't been able to create a consistent way to manage the life cycle of their information across these systems or dispose of unneeded or outdated information. This makes doing business more difficult, less secure, and less compliant. Gimbal's family of software products work together to let you create an efficient digital workplace. Our comprehensive software products include records management, content governance for SharePoint, and document management for SAP. Our document management for SAP product easily connects SAP and SharePoint content, data, and processes, putting critical business information right where people work. Gimbal's content governance for SharePoint product solves the first hurdle in the records management process by automating the classification and organization of newly uploaded content correctly, and then storing that content in its proper location within SharePoint and Office 365. Content governance for SharePoint also has features like enhanced search to maximize information findability, and site and document templates to enforce brand standards. Gimbal Records Management, which is an enterprise-wide records management software, offers seamless integration to manage all of your information within all of your repositories, not just SharePoint and Office 365, but file shares, Box, FileNet, Documentum, among others. It manages all of your content sources consistently from a single dashboard with a central file plan builder that ensures that your organization's most valuable information is managed properly with the correct retention schedule. It also manages physical records, both on-site and off-site. So by combining physical information management with digital records, Gimbal's Records Management will give your organization a unified view and access point to your entire information inventory. Our solution can be deployed on-premise, in the cloud, and we also provide it as a web-based SaaS offering. So now, without any further ado, I'm going to hand it over to Shinder so we can have an in-depth discussion around automation. Shinder, it's all yours.
All right, thanks a lot, Sean. So we'll get started in the very beginning. What is robotic process automation? What we're going to do in this webinar is learn a little bit about what it is, what are some of the advantages, disadvantages, more importantly, what problems that's good at solving, and finally, how can it be applied to information management, and how do you get started, and what does a robotic process automation project look like? So number one, what is robotic process information? Well, people have been calling it a replacement for humans. Is it artificial intelligence? Is it just business process automation on steroids? It's not much different, just another word for something we've been doing a long time. Just another technology buzzword. It's robots. So what is it? What is it really? So the components of robotic process automation, it is business process automation. It's a way to automate processes, execute them, and really make things easier. It may replace a person, it may replace multiple integrations. Why is that important? It's a virtual execution engine. It allows interactions within the user interface without humans to actually touch the user interface. You can record keystrokes, you can do a lot of those type of things, and it's an execution engine that allows robots to do these things. Graphical tools. What that allows is, with robotic process automation software, there's a group of graphical tools that really enables the business users to build these processes and flows. It democratizes a lot of complex interactions. So anyone can build a robot given a little bit of training and with the right tools. And finally, it allows repeatable and scalable actions. It really is a platform for organizing and executing these repetitive tasks. As we go into a little more depth, we'll see what that really means. So how does robotic process automation work? A robot does something. And what can this robot do? Well, it can open applications, can do things with these applications, such as filling in a form. These processes can be recorded. So a robot can go in using the RPA software. You can record all of your keystrokes, and then the robot can perform those actions. With some of the more advanced RPA tools, you can run back-end code. So a business user can go in and say, let's have the robot do something. Well, that robot is going to open a page, type something into a form. You can record those steps so you don't have to have any type of programming knowledge, or drag a component that says get information from the system. Then what does it do? Well, once it does something, we're going to get something else. This robot's going to get some information off of some of these forms and applications. Pulling that information, it can return some query results. It can also use things like optical character recognition, artificial intelligence, to say, on this screen, what I'm looking at, here's what I need. Something that looks like an invoice number. Something that is on the screen, maybe it's a social security number, or maybe it's a username. Once it does something, it retrieves information. And what does the robot do with that information? It does something else. So it's very simple. What is this something else? Based on the information that the robot has retrieved, it can now open a new application. Maybe after it opens a new application, you want it to delete a file. How do we know what that file name, where it is? It's part of that previous process. Maybe it can copy a file, move something around. Let's look at some manual publishing processes. You have applications that are legacy, you have files and content in multiple locations. A robot can now use information from a form or something else, move that content around. It can also do a search a database. I have some information, I'm trying to upload a piece of content, I'm doing some research, but now I need some more information. How do I know where to get it? Well, a robot could do that. A robot could use that information that you gave it, get the information back, and then present it in another way. So this is all very simple. So what makes this powerful? So what makes it powerful is the idea of orchestration of these robots. And orchestration is really like a conductor. It's an orchestra. Imagine each robot, or each set of robots, each robot is an instrument. You have, your strings. And when you put all of these things together, you now have a string section, or, a brass section, or percussion. And with orchestration, all of these sections, defined in very simplistic ways, can now work together in concert, just like an orchestra. And the conductor, which would be the robotic automation platform for all the business users really puts that together and creates a lot of value. And what else after you do orchestration? What else is included? All of these steps can be audited. We'll know what the robots do, we know when they do it, we know when they fail, and perform actions when these things happen. A lot of times when a robot fails, we might need to bump that up to a real human to see why that happens. Maybe make a fix to the robot. Maybe these are exception processing where the robot doesn't know enough with getting the information or doing something with that information. And finally, because this is all in a system, we're able to do analytics. How effective are these robots? How much time is it saving? Are we saving any time at all by automating some of these processes? So now that we have a good understanding of how, at a very high level, RPA works, let's see why someone would want to use RPA. So why would someone want to use robots instead of humans or instead of an existing process? You know, we all have APIs. There's already business process automation tools. There's middleware. There's workflow engines. You can do API programming. One of the things is it's a quick time to market. Because there's a graphical interface, because with RPA tools, we can record user interactions. A lot of these components, even from the back-end systems, already exist. Someone has built them in your organization. They may already exist if there's an RPA program. It makes it easy to automate legacy applications. A lot of these older applications may not have a built-in API to program with. As long as they have a user interface, someone can access it, click on it, then robotic process automation can automate those steps. Business users can develop. This is important because you don't have to go to IT every single time we want to connect two systems together. I want to simplify my day job. Click some buttons. I don't need to know how to program. I can drag some components around, record what I do, move these things together. There's a little bit of training, but it really simplifies the process of automation. The other thing is because they are robots, they force process standardization. What does that mean? For a robot to do something, you have to really understand what it needs to do. We need to know the process for the robot to follow. So in a way, it forces us to step back and say, really, what are you trying to accomplish? And what are we trying to program the robot to do? Because at the end of the day, the robot is only going to be as good as the process that it's trying to mimic. It minimizes manual processes. One of the key types of processes RPA solves a lot of the AP and invoice processing, where there's a lot of data entry, a lot of manual entry across systems, getting a file and getting an invoice, scanning it in, now copying the invoice number to another system, matching it up, doing reconciliation. Those are a lot of manual processes. Because we've automated those processes, it increases compliance. Because the processes are now standardized, because RPA forces that standardization, compliance is increased. Also increases user satisfaction. I don't have to go to 10 places anymore. The robot's going to take over a lot of my mundane tasks. These are just a couple of advantages and why an organization would use RPA. So, why not? RPA really isn't a panacea for everything. A lot of times it's a part of a complete solution. When we talked about a little bit about invoice processing and using robotic process automation, let's say to process an invoice, it's part of a complete solution. That invoice still has to get scanned in. There still needs to be other integrated processes that hook into your RPA solution. So it's not complete. And a lot of times when those solutions exist, they actually have capabilities instead of using a screen capture or a business-driven interface to build robots. A lot of that's done with back-end programming, and it already exists. It can't fix the business process. This is where having process standardization is important. If the process isn't good, RPA isn't going to solve that. You're going to end up having a sprawl of robots that try to fit every single case of your business process. Once that business process is streamlined, one robot or one process or one orchestration can really solve it and automate it. Which leads to the next one, robot sprawl. If we all understand in an organization, when we give the business users and the consumers access to do things, guess what they're going to do? They're going to do things. As great as that is to help simplify their process, it also means they may be doing things that are not governed or not correct, but it works for them. And that leads to complexity. Complexity can be really difficult to manage. If you look at what we talked about with the 3 steps of a robot, do something, get something, do something else. That's really easy. Once you get to a complex orchestration, now with an interface and possibly with users that don't understand all the complexities of the process, you're now conducting an orchestra that really needs someone who's really good at the violin and someone who's really good at playing the tuba, and it becomes really complex. So don't think RPA will simplify your processes, simplify how you integrate all your applications. That complexity still exists. It just makes it easier to see because it is visual, and also may help identify where these complexities are. Performance, that's another thing. Performance compared to traditional business process automation. And with a lot of these platforms, they are very scalable with RPA platforms, but at the end of the day, if they're really just doing screen scraping and recording and moving things around, that's going to be an order of magnitude slower than hooking into the back-end systems. A lot of times, if you can't hook into the system, RPA is a solution, and it's a quick solution. Instead of having to build a script, and even at Gimbal, we've looked at some of these things just internally. Instead of having to build a script that integrates these 2 applications or makes it easy for us to do a configuration, why don't we just do RPA? It's quick and dirty. I can get it done. A business analyst could probably program that robot. We don't have to use developers. Testing is pretty straightforward. You just repeat that process and see if it works. So it really is the performance of that is where it's going to be. The backend processes, the scripts, code is going to be much faster. One of the other disadvantages is change resiliency. With the newer RPA tools, we can eliminate some of that. There's some pattern matching, there's some AI things where it's going to look for things that are close when we do a screen scrape and try to figure out where to get the information, where to click, what events to trigger. But if the user interface changes, if the process changes, the robots are just going to break. We can look at, you have something where it's very, very strict. These robots do A, B, C, D. You move one of the blocks, it's not going to know where to find it. We're going to have to do that. If you're still in an organizational change or going through change, especially with processes, the robots are going to need to be reprogrammed, and change resiliency is going to be an issue. And finally, it's the new buzzword, RPA. Let's get into this. We can replace people. We can make things much faster, make more money. Everyone can do what they need to do. Let's simplify everything. But there are other alternatives. Some of these traditional alternatives, as we talked about, just basic API programming. If we're trying to put something like Gimbal to Salesforce or Gimbal to one of these other platforms, both those platforms have an application programming interface. It may be very natural just to hook those together with a workflow engine. If you guys are on Microsoft Flow will be able to hook into multiple systems. So robotic process automation is a good solution, but it's not the end-all, be-all for all solutions. We really have to think about why it's being used. So we've talked about RPA as a solution. So what's the problem? What are some things that RPA is really good at solving? Well, it's good at solving things with a well-defined process. These things are robots. They're going to follow rules. Without rules, they're not going to be able to be very efficient or know what to do. The other one is high cost resources. Why would we want a robot to do something if we have to program it and the resources doing that aren't really going to get much benefit? So when I say high cost resources, it really isn't replacement, it's an augment. You don't want someone who's an architect or a very highly paid engineer have to worry about something mundane that a robot could do. We want to have them spend their time doing things that are most valuable and that they are really the only people that can do that work. Multiple steps. What that means is if you have a process with many steps, and that goes to the next one, with a lot of integration points, a human's going to have to jump around. They're going to have to look at different things. They're going to have to transcribe data from one system to another. It causes errors, and it just gets frustrating. Finally, difficult or non-existing APIs. Really talked about this a little bit, where the APIs themselves of a legacy system may not exist. Either the knowledge of the API or the technology has left an organization. The platform is old and there is no knowledge at all. Or this is a very proprietary piece of technology where it's just not open at all and there's no way to get at that. And when that happens, it's very difficult to automate without something like an RPA tool. So this really gets to the meat of the conversation. Managing information record management is hard. And if you look at a lot of the issues of why it's hard, RPA may be a very good solution. It's too complex. People don't like doing it. And when we talk about information management, is to manage information, we have to allow the system to have enough context, enough information for it to be managed. Managing information is also processes. So when we talk about classification, when I drop something in my file share or my OneDrive or Box, I really don't want to spend the time tagging it with what it is. I know what it is. Why is that important? I know where to find it. If I just sort by date or by a file name, I know what to look for. But for real information management, for governance, I need to provide a little more information. And sometimes that information is complex. Sometimes I don't know what that really is. Personally, I don't like doing it. That's where it leads to sprawl. We have a lot of these repositories. It takes my time. I'd rather do something else. But for kind of the other side of the house, if I neglect it, it introduces a lot of risk to the organization. What if this was really important and accidentally gets deleted? What if it's proprietary information and I put it in the wrong place? And my process and my department may be very different than someone else's process in someone else's department. So a lot of these things can be solved at a high level in theory through governance, through standardization, through training. But we're all human, and at the end of the day, it's difficult. That change management is so difficult, and robotic process automation may help. And how can it help? Take a look. So with these information management problems, we have some RPA solutions. When I look at information management, it's really these 4 blocks. Content creation. So before it gets into my repository, ECRM, electronic content and records management platform, is content creation. How do I create it? Then when it gets in, it's content enrichment. When it's going in, I want to enrich that content. I want to give it context. I want to understand more about it. Once it's in the system, so after it gets into it, it's content management. And this is really just managing and collaborating, using that content, making it valuable. I'm publishing data. I'm working with my peers. I want to make that easy. And finally, when it leaves the content repository, this is content disposition. I want to keep something that's temporary for a year, then it needs to be removed unless I make it a record or unless I make it final. What is that content lifecycle? At the end of it, it's always disposition. What is related to that? How does it get disposed of? So content creation. robotic process automation from a content creation standpoint, I think that's the most obvious. It is taking something from a system and having a robot extract the information out of the file, having the robot look in different locations, clicking some buttons, filling out a form to get additional information. So when I create the content, I know where it goes. So this is very evident in AP invoice processing, those type of things. Content enrichment. This is where RPA and some of the classification AI and those things kind of really coincide and mesh together. I need to enrich content. If I know all the systems where all my relational data exists, all my master data exists, enrichment, I won't say easy, but it's straightforward. Whenever I have an invoice number, I need to validate it against this database. But with RPA, what if that information is in a legacy system? What if that information changes and I need a business user just to help my own content enrichment? So in theory, if I didn't want to add context to a piece of content that I'm uploading, a robot could say, I can program Wednesday, click over here, grab this information out of this Word document, out of this application, and then go into this other system, let's say SharePoint or Documentum, OpenText, any of these other systems, and fill out the form for me, fill out the metadata form and save it. That helps me enrich that content. Content management. This is really the core of where RPA can help. Managing that content. This is where publishing is very important. Instead of manually moving content around and dragging and dropping and saying, after I created a document, it's not draft anymore, I want to send it to 10 people. Maybe I send an email. Maybe I can upload it to all of my legacy systems for people to start using. Here's where RPA is a solution, but we really have to look closely at the problem. Is it a process problem? Is it a governance or a repository consolidation problem when we have 15 legacy repositories that have to be updated? RPA can solve that pretty easily by automatically updating those 15 repositories. We have to step back a little bit and think about, do we need 15 repositories? Or does the process have to be this complicated? So having that conversation and even the definition, trying to define that robot can really help everyone get a better insight in the organization, in the processes. So it may not be the end, but it may be a means for a different end, which might be a repository consolidation. It might be business process improvement, and maybe RPA is a stopgap for some instances as well. And finally, content disposition. And what does that mean? Well, really disposition is disposing of content when it needs to happen. And what RPA does, and this is with Gimbal Lifecycle Management, what it does is at the end of a lifecycle, instead of just allowing the system to, let's say, remove the record, maybe the RPA tool can run a report. Maybe the RPA tool can go to a separate system and fill out a form saying, okay, these things are removed. Maybe it could go to multiple systems and notify users. A lot of these things can be done through APIs and through emails, but if the process is changing and we want the business to own some of this, instead of going to IT to program a new email notification, program a new report, have it sent around, an RPA tool could really streamline that process and make it very obvious on how we can have a very standardized disposition process. So let's take a look at this in another way. So this is kind of a really high-level picture of information management and where information is stored. And you can see there's SharePoint, there's traditional record management, there's traditional electronic content management, there's cloud, ECM, there's cloud file share, there's cloud sync, so many systems. If we wanted to integrate any of these systems, from a lifecycle management record standpoint, Gimbal does that. But let's say you want to do something else. You are not really going to find a developer or a consulting agency that knows everything across the board and the intricacies on how everything is interconnected. That's difficult. RPA is a good way to solve that problem. And what are the problems that we're trying to solve between these systems is analysis, the analyze. So as part of analysis between systems, I want to get some metadata from SAP. I want to compare it to something in Cloud ECM. I want to analyze it. I want to know what I have. An RPA tool, if you think about it in a little different way, the action itself may be just aggregating that information and then doing something with it, creating a report, putting that report on the analysis in a certain location. That's another way, instead of really automating user functionality, we can now use it to gather information across multiple systems and automate reporting and analysis functionality as well. So cleaning, robots can help that as well. RPA from a cleaning standpoint is looking at data from all different systems. Instead of writing a script to say, let's do a comparison, maybe we use a robot to say every time something goes in, or let's take a look at all the content because we have it in our traditional ECM, have a robot go in and run actual manual searches in some of these cloud platforms and see if there's a duplicate. And if there is, run a cleaning operation. The robots can do that as well. Organize, that's very similar to cleaning, and I think that everyone can kind of see a pattern is RPA helps bring a lot of these disparate systems together very quickly in a user-friendly manner. So what does organize mean? Maybe that organization is running a search on my cloud policies, on bots, looking at what I have, and then using the data from that search, and then looking at my traditional ECM, making a decision around that, and maybe creating new folders, maybe even hooking it up to a script that reorganizes your content. Managing, we talked a lot about managing already. This is kind of the core of user interaction, automating that user interaction, automating how content is used, how it's managed, and how someone really operates with it. This is the day-to-day. Managing really is the day-to-day task. As we move further into management, a lot of that is lifecycle management. How do we manage policies around this content? And RPA is good at gathering information in multiple places to help define a better policy. If this document exists in 3 places and I've seen it, the same name in Spring and then the same thing in an email, maybe I use that email information and use an RPA tool to tag the original content a little differently. I've also found it in email. So that's where managing can be a little more. It can be some auto classification as well. And finally, disposition. One of the neat things about not having to codify everything and using robots is, let's say I dispose something within the traditional ECM. That process can start a robot, activate that orchestration to say, let's run a search with some sort of metadata that I've got from that original disposition into all these other systems, even if they're not interconnected, even if there's no API for it, see what I find. If I find something I like, maybe a human can go and delete it, or maybe that can spawn off another robot to really help with disposition processes across multiple platforms. So this all sounds great, right? Where do I start? What's kind of the process? What do we have to think about to really make robotic process automation successful? Number one, I think we talked a lot about this. This is the most important. Establish governance. Before just embarking on any process, we want to answer why we're doing this, who's going to be responsible, and how it's actually going to get accomplished. Next, think big, but start small. Especially when RPA vendors come and when we look at robots, they can do so much and we can think that it's going to solve all our problems. But let's start small. What does that mean? It means picking the right project. When we pick the right project, and at Gimbal, we've developed a scoring system on what projects are the best for an RPA type solution. And the score takes in a lot of variables, such as risk mitigation. How risky is it? How often does this change? How many people does it affect? What's the calculated return on investment? All these things kind of go into a score. And a lot of times when an RPA program gets started, everyone's going to submit their ideas. There's going to be 100 ideas. Let's automate these 100 things. Let's get going. Using a scoring system, now we can start picking the right project on high value, low cost, high chance of success. The next one's important. Finish before flawless. It's so, and this is more from a developer's engineer standpoint. Everyone, when they're looking at a piece of software, wants it to be perfect. And that really gets in the way of just completing it. There's a little bit more that this robot can do. There's a little bit more. If we just did this, and now instead of that simple project, we picked the right one, now it balloons into this complex monstrosity that may or may not succeed because we've just made it way too complicated. And finally, after going through this exercise of governing, this thinking big, starting small, picking the right project, and trying to finish, at the end of the day, we may realize that RPA may not be the answer for this problem. And we always have to keep that in the back of our mind is with new technology, everything's nice and shiny, it can take over the world, but let's step back and see if it is really the right solution. And a lot of times it is, but we have to be really ready for the fact that maybe it isn't today. And we just need to move on and look at that next technology. And that's all I have. Any questions?
All right, great. Thank you, Shinder, for that in-depth discussion. All right. Now, if anyone has any questions, please feel free to submit them because we're going to jump into the Q&A portion. Also, you'll see a survey pop up on your screen. Everyone can take a quick second and answer those questions. And after the Q&A, we can go through the results as a group, and I think it'll be very informative for everybody. All right, so Shinder, we have a few questions for you here. Let's see. The first one is, how does Gimbal work with RPA?
So what Gimbal does is we work with RPA as a technology. We do have the technology and implementation specialists, but at a higher level, we take our Gimbal's strategic and roadmap and operational and governance framework that we do for information management and really apply that to managing robotic process automation projects and programs as well.
All right, perfect. Let's see. What long-term role do people play in these types of processes?
So is there a little bit more clarification from a long-term role? So if we are talking about, let's say, a long-term role for people play in these processes, an RPA solution most of the time isn't meant to replace people. There are certain little bits and pieces that they are, but it's really to assist and to work side by side with someone who does these processes. It streamlines it, it makes them more effective, and it really allows everyone who's using the tools to do what's important, and mundane tasks usually are not.
Okay. Great. Can this solution address GDPR and CCPA, which is the California privacy regulation?
So definitely from an RPA standpoint, if we look at the benefits and kind of the strength, the ways it would address something like GDPR and CCPA, it might accelerate the process of being able to do these manual searches across the multiple platforms all at once. And from GDPR, we need to find out from a search standpoint of what information exists. And part of what we talked about in the webinar as well is if we had RPA tools to help enrich that content while it's going into the system, that can also assist because that makes the kind of the output in the search much easier. And I assume the CCPA is going to be the same thing because it's about finding content and it's about finding information that belongs to someone.
Okay, great. Do we work with a specific RPA vendor or do we have our own RPA technology?
We work with any RPA vendors, and this is very similar to our professional services. We work with our clients to find the best solution out there. So we're open to working with all vendors. We currently do not have our own RPA technology, which is an RPA platform.
Okay. How will RPA benefit contract management process from procurement standpoint?
So when we look at RPA, kind of its strength, kind of going back to that, it will help streamline processes. And what we'll do is when we look at procurement and look at that business process, we're going to look at where the touch points are and where all the human interactions are inside that process and just plug in these RPA tools if that's the right solution. Sometimes it may be an API, sometimes it's a process change, but RPA tools really allow us to look into legacy systems. And some of the interesting things we could do is, let's say in procurement, we could just search even public information and use that to return results to really help enrich and support the decision-making process, especially for procurement.
All right, fantastic. And we have one more here. Let's see. How can we be sure we have considered all the exceptions at the outset?
Probably not the answer that you want to hear, but I don't know if there is a way to consider all the exceptions. There's always going to be a set of unknowns. What we can do when designing a good RPA robot is to, whenever there is an exception, that we make sure that gets bubbled up to a human to really deal with it. So don't assume and try to program the robot for every single exception. And that's kind of back to one of the tenets of let's finish the project, get the robot up and running before trying to make it flawless and capture all the exceptions. There's always going to be things once it starts running that are going to get kicked to humans. And when we kind of do the analytics portion, which a lot of RPA platforms have, we'll be able to look at the exceptions that are getting kicked up to humans, and maybe at that point when there's kind of a critical mass, we program that into the tool.
Oh, great. Thank you for answering those questions, and thank you everybody for submitting those questions. Let's review the responses we received from the survey, and Jinder can provide some thoughts around the results. So the first question, what pains are you currently experiencing with your records management process? And it looks like we have a tie: inability to apply policies across multiple systems and inability to ensure content is deleted when it should be.
So I think we've covered a lot of that in the webinar, right? Inability, the first one, RPA just kind of fits. It can work side by side with trying to apply that information to the content. That really depends on where that context can come from. For the other question from a disposition standpoint, that's where if we know what the content is, disposition, especially with a tool like Gimbal Records Management, it's all rules-based. As long as we know how to define what needs to be disposed of, it's a very straightforward process. And with an RPA tool maybe at the back end, we can now kind of cascade that disposition across multiple systems without any coding.
Okay, perfect. And speaking of systems, which of the below technologies does your organization use to store and generate content? We have SharePoint coming in first, but close second, file shares.
All right, so that's not surprising. One of the things with SharePoint and file shares, they can kind of be mixed together, right? OneDrive is kind of file shares, kind of SharePoint. We can also map SharePoint drives. So one of the things with RPA tools is because those platforms are pretty standardized and the APIs are pretty available, what you're going to get the most from using an RPA tool is a quick time to market, where you can test some of these processes and clicking around to see how the movement of content works, how we want to start classifying the content without really going to build some development tools and building scripts. What I really would advocate is test out the processes using RPA, but because these platforms are so ubiquitous with good APIs, the right solution may be just using something like Microsoft Flow or writing scripts or something that's a scheduled task to do some of these RPA functionalities. If you're looking at integrating with legacy systems, then that question becomes a little broader and we'd have to take a closer look.
Okay, perfect. Number 3, how often does your organization rely primarily on end users to supply metadata to digital content? And that's a huge percentage there.
Yeah, and I mean, that's not surprising. I have the same problem. I have to supply all that information myself. And if we look at using RPA maybe as a side-by-side and assistance tool, that'd be great. Using it as a part of some sort of audit classification program would be great as well. But most importantly is without governance and understanding the process and what needs to go in those fields and supplying that metadata, then any tool really isn't going to help that much. So that's really one of the considerations is, let's see where that information needs to come from. Can it only come from the mind of a human? Then we're gonna have a tough time making a robot human at this point. But if it's something where the human's gonna have to look at multiple places and make some decisions, then RPA or something that's out of classification may be a good solution.
Okay, and our last question here is your organization interested in applying RPA principles to content management in the next 18 months? So how interested are organizations in getting ready for RPA here? So I'm not sure, 46%, but very close is yes at 38%.
So hopefully this helps turn some of those not sures into yeses or nos. But 38%, that's a pretty high number, and the technology is pretty hot right now. And just like from the not sures, I really want this webinar and kind of our continuing conversations to be around picking the right solution for the right problem. Or if we have this solution, let's try to find a problem that fits. And just when you're going on that journey within the next 18 months, consider some of those things. Something like even rules-based classification and disposition and record management, like Gimbal, may eliminate the need for some RPA, but there's also things that RPA is uniquely qualified to do.
All right, fantastic. Thank you, Shinder, for reviewing those poll questions. I hope everyone got a lot of really great information from him today with the polls and the questions, or you added a question and answer period there. So if there are no more questions, we'll conclude our session for today. I hope everyone enjoyed the webinar, and if you have any more questions or if you would like to receive a personalized demo of our software, please feel free to email Shinder or myself directly, or you can contact Gimbal through our website at info@gimbal.com. Once again, we will send this recording to everyone within 24 and 48 hours, and we hope you join us again for our next webinar. Thank you, everyone, and hope you have a wonderful rest of your day.